I mean, first of all, I think this is we all got to change our thinking from you know you've got you need the idea of two gappers, where you need to the Niners play a one gap get up the field scheme. And that's what this guy is. He's an athletic one gap penetrator who's thick and burly in the lower half, kind of like a Dana Stubblefield, burly thighs, burly legs, and just he's compact, but he also is a very productive sack guy. He was a productive sack guy at South Carolina State. I saw him. He looked great in the All-Star game coming out during the East West Shrine practices. I noticed him the year he came out, and I thought, wow, look at this guy, man. This guy, strong. He can anchor. Even though he doesn't have real long arms, he's got just an unbelievable motor. And, he's got playmaking ability. He's got a quick burst up the field. He's got surprising foot quickness. And then he's got some moves. He's got a really, really nice spin move. He's got a really nice club move. He's a pass rusher. This is an interior rusher who's going to get up the field. This guy really is an impressive player. I mean, he had 16 sacks his final year at South Carolina State.
Mm-hmm.
And then, then he had 13 and a half more, the year before that. So, I mean, he's guys who sack the quarterback. You don't see 300-pound defensive tackles among the nation's league leaders in sacks, even at the FCS level. But in 2014 to 2015, this guy dominated that MEAC that he played in, and was ranked third in all of FCS with 16 sacks as a burly 6'1", 310-pound interior player. So I love him. The other thing that he does is, Kinlaw can barely stay on the field. This guy barely comes off the field. Played almost every snap all year.
Yeah. And he's played, I think he's missed like 3 starts. Or he's not, excuse me, I think he's missed like 3 games in his career. And he started a whole bunch. And like you mentioned, I think that fitness level, Larry, is what's so impressive. This dude wears his 305 pounds like it's nothing because he's got such a big lower half, huge thighs, huge butt, huge calves. But he's got extremely light feet, and he seems to be in incredible shape, which tells me that, he's a consummate professional if he's able to play this many snaps because his body is in unbelievable shape for a guy that big to rush the passer the way he does. And I think if there's one kind of flaw, I guess, to him is that he's maybe not as stout against the run as you would usually expect with guys that have his lower half. Like I mentioned, he's got a nose guard's lower half. But Larry, I also thought that was a little bit of a case of playing in Philadelphia where they played all those variety of different fronts. He had to 2-gap a lot. It's not necessarily what his skill set is. You put him in this defense and ask him to do what DJ Jones was doing. He can take on double teams with the best of them. He can shoot gaps with the best of them. He's a dominant force as a pass rusher. It's an absolute home run signing, Larry. I don't usually like when, I don't necessarily always compliment when you go sign a big name because sometimes I feel like the big name can be a little bit overrated. In this case, Larry, I thought he was worth every penny. And I think we're seeing this offseason. Nate Tice, Mike Tice's son, who's who works for The Athletic, he's obviously incredibly smart. He pointed out that we're seeing this offseason with Sexy Dexy Dexter Lawrence getting the money and Christian Wilkins getting the money. And Jeffrey Simmons is going to get paid. Deron Payne got paid. Javon Hargrave got paid. Defensive tackle has become a premium-ish position in the NFL. And the 49ers have the best defensive tackle duo in the sport. And for a team that values their defensive line so much, they have 3 guys who legitimately need to be double-teamed on any given play, which is, I know, Krug, in our last show, you pointed out how you thought the best pass rushers had had multiple guys that required a double team on every given play. 49ers have that 100% now.
Totally. And they took him away from the Eagles. So it's like a double. It's a double win for the Niners. And then also when you look into this draft, it's really stacked at defensive end. But I think a lot of those defensive tackles, there's going to be some busts in there. And, you know, you might be able to find a guy, but there's going to be some busts in that defensive tackle group this year. So now you got a guy who's a sure thing.
Right.
And you know, immediately you've got a guy that your pass rush in the interior, you know, suddenly Bosa is even better, you know, and if um they they probably need to add another player or two in this area on the defensive line, but man, I mean, to get a real difference maker, it's great to see. I mean, to me, there's so few difference makers that I think teams go a little too crazy on free agents. I'd rather go with fewer free agents and pay them more and then have the rank and file players come from the draft than pay lots of free agents a little bit. Give me a couple true, because I want the guy. Here's the thing: when you sign a big time free agent, he comes into your room. Oftentimes, you're paying him more than guys that were there before. So unless he's considerably better than them, you kind of have bad vibes in the room. So, like, if you're gonna go get a free agent, kind of the underrated part of free agency is go get Charvarius Ward. Why? Because no Niner corner in house is going to be able to say, "Hey, man, I should have gotten that money." No,
Right.
you're not as
Right.
good as him. And the same way, no Niner, you know, Kalia Davis and the other D linemen are not going to be like, Javon Hargrave's not worth that cash.
No,
You
not
know what I
even a
mean?
chance.
Where if you do get guys, let's say you get a guy and he's a little bit better than what you got, but you're paying him a lot. Now it's like, hey man, I should be getting paid. I think you need that if you're let's just say this, if if what you pay your players doesn't make sense, that has an impact on your chemistry. So it has to make sense. You can't just keep paying guys from the outside the most unless those guys are the best, you know, because they're oftentimes coming in and trying to learn a scheme that guys that are already there already know. So if you got to have 5 or 6 guys teaching a guy a scheme and everybody else sees that he's not up to speed and that he's making all the money, now you got some bad vibes. Now you got some resentment. You're what you pay your guys has to jive or you have issues in your room.
Right. And great example of this, right? 49ers couldn't pay Mike Upati, I think, in 2013 because he wanted more money than Joe Staley. And they couldn't disrespect Joe Staley because Joe Staley, one thing about him, right? He never asked for more money, even though he signed his contract so early. He signed his contract, I think, in 2008. He signed a very big contract, and it was before everybody, or he signed it in 10, excuse me. He was drafted in 7. He signed his extension in 10, and nobody was appreciating how good a player he was at the time. And I remember Trent Baalke said, hey, Joe Staley's a really, really good player. And then Staley never came back, right? And asked for more money later. And so the Niners couldn't disrespect him. So that's a great, great point by you, Krug. And the last thing I want to add here about Javon Hargrave is the obviously we know the talent of the player is really exceptional, but I don't think I really understood how good he was, Larry. I mean, I had an idea. I've watched a couple of games here and there of the Eagles, but when I went back and watched him, I've watched about 5 games of the Eagles this year. I thought he was the best player on their defensive line, and that was a defensive line that had 70 sacks this season. And guys like Hassan Reddick really balled out. Brandon Graham balled out. Josh Sweat played really well. Jordan Davis looked very good at the beginning of the season. Fletcher Cox is still a dominant presence, and I thought this was the best player on their defensive line. So he's that good of a player. And the last point is I wanted to make is I think we should have seen this coming a little bit. The one thing I'll say is we shouldn't have seen it coming from the standpoint was I was surprised they went after the defensive tackle market this offseason, not because of the position you and I have talked about ad nauseum of what a need defensive tackle is, but because the market was going to be reset so many times this offseason with Christian Wilkins having to get paid and Dexter Lawrence and Jeff Simmons that I thought Simmons might have signed his extension. I think I've mentioned him twice, but I'm not actually sure if he signed his extension or not. But the point is, Wilkins, Payne already did. Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence will reset the market again. I didn't know if the 49ers wanted to participate with that. And clearly they do because they feel that the player and the need just matches so well together, and it does. And the one thing I want to mention is that So one common theme with the Niners and free agents they sign is they seem to like players that play well against them. And I've noticed this with Shanahan, right? Paid Quan Alexander a lot of money in 2019. Quan Alexander's two best games were with the Buccaneers were against the Falcons and against Kyle Shanahan. I remember a player on the 49ers told me that he knew they were going to sign Charvarius Mooney Ward because when they played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, apparently Shanahan really highlighted how good Mooney Ward was. And the one thing I remember is I knew Javon Hargrave was a good player. He was kind of, lost in the mix the way Alex Highsmith is lost in the mix in Pittsburgh now. He was kind of lost in between Stephon Tuitt and Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward is, an all-time great. Stephon Tuitt was really an excellent player for a while. But that week 2 game last year or 2 years ago, Larry, in 2021, when the Eagles beat the 49ers, I thought 97 on the Eagles was the best player on the field in that game. Javon Hargrave kicked ass in that game. He dominated in that game. And I think that's just another sign, right? We're talking about defensive players Shanahan likes paying big bucks to. There's another example of a guy that really dominated his offense. And so he went and got him in free agency.
I saw him on Monday Night Football against Washington in November, and he was just incredible in that game. He had 13 tackles. He had 4 solo. He had a sack. So then I said, I'm going to watch him the next week. They played in Houston against the Texans. He had 7 tackles and 3 sacks. Then I watched him the next week against the Steelers, and he had 8 tackles and 2 more sacks. I mean, the guy had a tremendous year. He really did. In the middle of the year, he was almost impossible to block. So I just think he's a blue chipper. He's a blue chip player. The Pittsburgh system for the down linemen is more of a read and react, and they're sending TJ Watt off the edge, but they're making those guys 2-gap a little bit. The Philly scheme fits his game more, and the Niners scheme fits it even more.
Yeah,
they're going to widen. They go with the wide 9. They're going to go with the shoot up the field. All kinds of games, all kinds of stunts, all kinds of movement. It just rewards guys who move well. And Hargrave moves well. And he's replacing a guy in Kinlaw who moves so poorly that it was just and he was so bad against the run. I would say Hargrave's going to be better against the run and the pass than what Javon was.
He's a perfect fit to do what DJ Jones did in this defense. He's just a better player across the board than DJ Jones. And he's just got the body, right, to just be a one technique and a shade one. Look at his legs, Krug. Look at his butt. The guy has a huge lower half. He's just naturally huge, and he's so athletic. He's so nimble and agile for a guy his size. He's incredible. And I thought the last thing you mentioned that was great is his hustle, right? Chris Kasarik loves his defensive linemen, who run down the field, run down screens, all of that. This dude does that. Like, he's really an amazingly conditioned athlete. He plays so many snaps. I don't think people realize this dude is legitimately a 3-down player. He does not come off the field, and he plays every game. Like, in terms of a signing for the 49ers, if Javon Hargrave was, 26 years old, that's the only thing I would want to change, because everything about the player, he's durable, he's produced every season, he's improved in every season. He's in his prime. He's athletic. He fits a need both in the run and the pass. He solves an issue for them both in the run and the pass. And then he seems to be the consummate professional. Like, the shape he is in is fantastic. The guy plays every single snap for a guy that big. That's not common. DJ Jones didn't used to play that many snaps for the 49ers.
Yeah, no, this guy's, it's a tremendous pickup. It really is. And that's why they're paying him $20+ million. And more than anything, I also like it because it goes with the trends of the game, which are that the trends of the game are that teams are passing more, and they're passing more every year. And so, yeah, there's Jonathan Hankins types, and there's Javon Kinlaw types, and there's these guys that don't give you much as a pass rusher, but give you a lot as a run defender. But those guys that's like a totally secondary, that's a less valuable deal now. Every guy on your D line's got to be a pass rusher. I think I saw this when the Eagles won the Super Bowl a few years ago with Nick Foles.
Right.
They every guy on their defensive line was a pass rusher. And then when you have that, that just makes it that just makes it, you're just putting a lot of pressure on the opposition. This year they got 70 sacks out of their from the Eagles overall had 70. A historic number. I mean, only the 85 Bears and
Bears
like
had more.
the Vikings of the late 80s with Millard and Dolman and the Henry Thomas ever had more. And Hargrave was a big part of that. So I think it's a slam dunk. It gives them an interior rusher, and I think it makes them. They still need more help up front, but now they've got a guy who has to be doubled.